things from me. Why scale 3D? So we're using the 3D model for strategic planning and evaluation in the Transition Together project as a whole. We believe it can be really useful and helpful for your projects too. And I can feel that as part of Transition Town Tooting in Southwest London here, how useful this tool can be. Using a coherent language across the whole project can also support learning across groups and help our reporting. So there is an element of that monitoring, evaluation, reporting to it as well. And finally, we'll ask you to report on your projects using these 3D template. That is the kind of scaffolding for the reports that we'll ask for you halfway through the year, and then at the end of the year after the seed-funded projects have completed. So we know some of you are bringing questions into this webinar about planning, monitoring, and evaluation. So do bring them into the workshop, and we'll see if we can offer solutions as we go through, or indeed you may find solutions when you're just doing your peer-to-peer work in breakout rooms. We'll touch back on any questions still present at the end of the session and get back to you perhaps at a later point on Vive, the platform that we're using and developing, or indeed by email. We'll be here to support you as you go through the year and through your projects. So if we don't manage to address it today, don't worry. Keep asking the question and we'll help as best we can, okay? So is everyone cool? How you doing out there? Do give us some reactions as you go along. And I'm going to hand over to Tim for the Scale 3D introduction. Tim.
Great, thanks for landing us so gracefully, Rich. Yeah, so I'm Tim. I've developed the Scale 3D model, which is about creating impact or scaling impact in 3 dimensions: depth, width, and length. And we found it really useful in the transition project as a whole. And so now we're kind of experimenting a bit live with you, how it can also be applied on a local level. And we believe it can really help you to get a clearer picture in this fairly simple language of depth, width, and length, of how to look at your projects and how you can have more impact, how you can plan for impact and evaluate it. And I'll just briefly show a 5-minute video that I pre-recorded to introduce the model in as crisp and clear and short way as possible. So I'll also share the link in the chat so you can watch it later again if you like. So I'll just share my screen now. And yeah, enjoy the video. Here we go. Hi folks, I'm Tim, and I'm working with Transition Together for the evaluation and strategy of the whole project. And I'm going to present to you briefly a very simple model that you can also use at the local level in your own projects for both strategic planning and learning, as well as reporting your activities. So basically, it's about increasing your impact in 3 dimensions: depth, width, and length. And at the simplest level, it's really about just thinking about your work using this language of widening, deepening, and lengthening. And I'll briefly say a little bit more about what we mean with those 3 dimensions. And this can help you both in as you orient yourself in the planning stage and think about what it is you want to achieve. And then as you implement your projects, about learning and seeing, where do we see strengths or maybe some weaknesses or blind spots, and also about monitoring and reporting on your activities. So when you think about designing your projects, really start, first of all, with what impact you want to have, and then what's needed to make that happen, right? So it's really that impact focus. Depending on how you design your projects, your impact can be large or little in those 3 dimensions, from low impact to higher impact, right? So that you see those 3 scales here. So let's start with widening, right? So you can have a more narrow impact if you're just reaching a small number of people with similar age or views or similar social status, and you widening your reach and becoming more widespread and having more wide influence is when you really reach people of different backgrounds and views, and having partnerships with various organizations where you really create these wider ripple effects throughout your community or region or wider society. So that's widening. Then deepening is all about having more fundamental change in terms of systemic impact on policies, on how power, how decisions are made, and values and mindsets. So the kind of the culture side of systems, right? So you can think of at the low end having some nice projects around recycling or gardening, which as such are really beautiful, but maybe don't really challenge those deeper systems. To then having projects around really shifting the food system, the energy system, maybe the monetary system, but also shifting mindsets around social justice, around really changing power relations with the council so that decisions are made in service of everyone in your community. And yeah, the lengthening piece is around moving from just having these short-term projects that stop once funding ends, or maybe that fail when tensions arise and there's internal challenges or disputes, to really having a more continuous and lasting effect over time, and having diverse funding streams or getting new funding on as one funding stops, but also being able to overcome challenges, to deal with conflict in a healthy way, to learn and adapt as crises emerge, and really creating an engagement from also maybe a wide number of people for having lasting and impact over time. Really seeing what conditions are needed to have that longevity. Yeah, so that's basically the three dimensions, widening, deepening, lengthening, and people might have different understandings of it. That's not so important that you have a correct view of what is now widening, what's deepening, lengthening, but to use it as a generative tool to think about, what are the different ways that we can have impact. And in the ideal case, you might address all three of those dimensions in your project, but it's also okay to just prioritize one or maybe two of them. For instance, if you say your main goal is to focus on deepening, let's say we're working with your council and shifting how decisions are made, or you want to widen by building better partnerships, to have a more diverse reach, get more diverse people involved, that's completely fine. But even if you have that focus, you might still want to consider, okay, if we want to build these partnerships to widen our reach, how can we ensure that these partnerships will last and evolve over time? So that's the lengthening, right? And how we can use those partnerships to also have more systemic impact. So then you also address the deepening piece. Yeah, so the invitation is really to clarify what you want to achieve in each of those dimensions, or where you want to put your emphasis. And then in the second step, to think about how can you design your activities so that you can actually widen, deepen, and lengthen your impact. So what conditions do you need to create in terms of how you do outreach, who you need in your team, who to collaborate with, how you organize your decision making, and how you deal with money and find additional funding and so on. So just in terms of the process, you might think of these three key stages here. And right now you're probably in the first step of deciding what impact you want to have, what outcomes on your target groups, really the goal setting stage, as well as the second one of planning, what roles do you need in the team, what activities will you perform to contribute to your goals and your outcomes. And then the third stage around monitoring and evaluation, both for learning about how you can adapt and grow over time, as well as reporting on what impacts you've achieved or what results you had. Yeah, so again, really curious to hear from you how this is helpful for you. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And that's all from my side for now. All the best. All right, so I hope that was understandable enough for now. You'll get a bit more into it as we actually start using it. So we'll be just playing around with the tool a little bit in a session today. Maybe just the key points to highlight. Start with the end goal in mind. What is the impact you want to achieve, and then think backwards. What are the conditions you need to create for having that impact? And to think of impact in those three dimensions, and pass it on to Rich to highlight a few more points before then actually starting using it.
Thanks so much, Tim. And yeah, we'll share that video with you as well, so you can refresh your mind and whatnot about that. So yeah, to reiterate, we'll be using this framing of widening, deepening, and lengthening to look at your projects. And as we said at the beginning of the call, there's an awareness that projects are at different stages in the room tonight. And indeed, this is a selection of the wider projects, the 70 projects we're supporting through seed funding, which is only a mere selection of the hundreds of projects transitioners do up and down the country in the 300 groups in England and Wales. So yeah, so come have a play with us right now. You could apply a different project if you feel like yours is completed already, your seed funded project. But yeah, come have a play with it as a tool and see what insights it will bring. And just to land perhaps in different terms, so where sometimes terminology around these things can be a barrier as well as a way into it. So I'm just going to land them in slightly different terms, maybe the terms that that resonated with me when I got working with this tool. So widening, how is your project increasing engagement, perhaps through partnerships or collaborations, or through sharing and exchanging powerful stories? So that's the idea of widening. Deepening, how's your project's roots perhaps creating cracks and fissures in the current system? How is it shaking up the power structures that are perhaps blocking progress where you are? How is your project showing a different way for us to be in relationship with each other and with the earth, changing mindsets and values? And lengthening, how do we do this over the longer term? This is perhaps one a lot of transitioners really connect with, that idea of resilience, how to nourish ourselves and look after ourselves over the longer term. Is your project contributing to positive change over time? Is it nourishing your groups and the lovely people who you're working with? Are you honing your craft as you go along? So that's the ideas of lengthening.
Yeah, so we just wanted to hear back from you a little bit. How was that for you? So I'll just post a reflection question here in the chat. Just keen to hear your observations. How is it for you to position your project in this 3D lens? And was it clear where your main focus lies, or was it entirely confusing? Yeah, please feel free to raise your virtual hand, and we'll just take a few reactions. So we won't go through everyone now, but just hear a few voices. We have about 10 minutes for that. Also, if you any questions that came up for you, and please try and keep your sharing succinct, so we have the opportunity for everybody who wants to share to do so. So if you want to raise your hand, you can find the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom window if you're on a laptop. And then it says raised hand. So I'll just take the raised hands one after each other. Dan, go for it.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so would you like me to talk about my project or my partner's project? Who I spoke to?
Yeah, so you don't need to go too deep into the project itself, more like how was it for you to position the project using that lens?
I think the three criteria were quite helpful. It's quite, I think for both of us, there was fairly clear how our project fitted into at least two of them. And I think probably with both of ours, you could argue that there are elements of all three of the criteria kind of going on in the project. But I think it was quite an interesting way to think about them. I haven't thought about our project in terms of those specific criteria before. So yeah, I thought it was quite helpful, and would have liked a bit more time to discuss it, to be honest, but I think we're always going to say that.
Great. Yeah, you'll get some more time in the second round of breakouts. So thanks, Dan. Anita?
Yeah, I was with Jane. Really nice to hear about her library of things starting up. When she was talking, it was clear that at that stage of her project, which is at quite an early stage, that, and particularly with a project like that, it was mostly to do with widening, because it's very people sort of face out, people oriented. You need to get people into the library to share the things before you can do any of the policy shifting or the deepening or the changing of attitudes and all of that. So, and also lengthening, maybe it was a bit early in the project. So it was I hadn't really thought of evaluating a project in these three ways before. And I think that it helped kind of crystallize something about where a project needs to be, not just overall, but at a particular time in the project's life. The project that I'm involved in is much further down the line, and I was putting it slap bang in the middle because I was like, it is as deep, as long, as wide, and as multidimensional as a big octopus, which is sucking all our brains out and making us very excited and giggly. But that's partly because we're further along with it, than Jane was. So yeah, I thought it was really helpful. Thank you.
That's great. The three-dimensional octopus, I haven't thought of it that way. That's awesome. Leslie, go ahead. You're still muted, Leslie.
I was talking with Sue from Carmarthen, and by the time we'd just about finished, so we hadn't got a chance to place ourselves. So what I would say is that we're on quite similar projects, but she's starting from completely scratch and we're doing a renovation almost. So I would say that Sue's probably at the beginning of Wide, and we're there trying to move on to Lengthen, but it would be interesting to see whether Sue agrees with me.
All right, thank you, Leslie. John, go ahead.
Okay, I was with Juliet from Lewis, and both of our projects were largely about widening. That was the main focus of them. But we did start looking, I think, at how we could actually build in deepening and lengthening as well. And certainly for me, that's something I'll take back to our planning group, that we need to do more than just reaching a wider audience. So I think that should have been part of our original planning, but it's not too late because the project's in its very early stages.
Great to hear that. That's useful already for being a bit more systematic in your thinking and in all dimensions. Andrew.
Absolutely lovely to hear about another project already that resonates for us all. I mean, the Lewis project, Henrietta was just so enthusiastic and positive about it. It was wonderful. I think but there's something about how we take away these things. I couldn't care less, to be honest, about the three legs. I'm sorry. It's just hearing what people are saying and thinking, gosh, we haven't thought in those terms. Or we've done something a bit like that, but I've never seen it like that. And it's just really good to have this dialogue. And the more dialogue we have, the better. Thank you.
Great, Andrew. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, I was just curious. That's great to hear people are finding, the people who've spoken so far has found real ways in, and in different ways, a little bit in the chat as well about how people are finding a way in. Did anyone find it really tricky to apply this Scale 3D framework to what they were hearing? I just wonder if anyone found it tricky. Amazing. There you go, Tim. That's a massive thumbs up from this group of people. Accessible. Brilliant. And would anyone else, just opening the floor, would anyone else like to share? We have 2-3 minutes left on this sharing.
I have something to say again.
Actually, should we just hear from Sue first, from Lewis? Her hand did go up slightly before yours as well, Anita. Technically speaking, go ahead, Sue.
I'm pressing madly and it wouldn't do it. Yeah, I ended up in a room on my own, unfortunately. So I'd like to know who I was talking to from Crowborough.
Was it Mike Coyne, I think? I popped in a room with yourself, but after a few minutes.
You. All right. Yeah, because it was really nice to actually realise, he's someone quite close and we'd had early conversations about how to set up. in Crowborough. So really nice to hear that they're kind of really running with it now. But we didn't get to go too deep into the process of the 3 aspects. We were just introducing ourselves, really. But it was very useful. And definitely helps with things like Vive, you know, to be able to picture people and other projects. It's so good to hear about other things like this. I think it makes it tangible. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's always a very important element of these sharings, even on Zoom with all its compromise. You just get to hear and meet people, don't you, and share projects and share inspiration, sometimes close, sometimes far away. So cool. So Tim, should we go back to actually, should we hear from Sue? Anita, is that okay? And then come back to Anita, and then perhaps we'll then move on to the next bit. Is that okay with you, Tim? Okay, cool. Sue.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really on that last point that it was fantastic because I was in the room with Leslie, and we actually met on the when we did the thing about applying for the seed funding, and we were in a breakout room together then. And so it's just fantastic for us to catch up and sort of, you know, talk about those projects again, especially as our projects have got a lot of similarities. And as Leslie said, we didn't really get to the point of particularly using the Jamboard. But, you know, I can definitely see how our projects fit into those things. And I think it could be really useful. So, yeah, but that was great. I just wanted to say that, you know, it's the continuity of keeping in touch with people is absolutely priceless as well, I think.
Oh, brilliant. That warms my heart to hear that. Fantastic. And you're welcome to use the chat to share contact details if you're both, you know, ask people if that's okay. And also use Vive. I'll share the link to this online platform that we've built through the Transition Together project called Vive. If you haven't come across that yet, there's loads of seed funding people on there, and there's a seed funding space on there and so on. And that's a great place to connect. It's like Facebook, but without all the extractive algorithms. So it's like a transition version of Facebook for people to organize and get in touch together. Hopefully that's the idea. Okay, cool. Let's come to Anita.
No, I just thinking about what was the hardest term, if there was, for me, was lengthening, because I think that for most of us, probably, we're so busy with the actual day-to-day physical doing of the stuff that thinking like longer term into the future about things like succession or I don't know. It's sometimes I think we lose sight of, you know, we can see into the future a little bit, but not that far into the future. But just because we're so busy, do you know what I mean? That was it was kind of like, yeah, I'll get onto longevity when I've just finished doing this thing now. So I don't know how that. I can see how it would really like appeal to a funder to see that a project is thinking about how it's going to continue beyond the end of the funding. I mean, I know that would be important, but whether that helps you actually run your project now, it's just a question. I don't know. I'm rambling.
Well, I think Sue was already mentioning the relationship building is key to lengthening, right? You're maintaining relationships over time. And so it's less about the project continuing and more about the relationships that are built through that project, right? So how can you think from the beginning on, what are the conditions you can create to really build those trusting, mutually supportive relationships in the community that once the project is ending, you've done all of that relationship building throughout the project and not just at the end, so that the results of the project last over time, not the project itself necessarily. All right, I think I'll steward us now into the second interactive exercise, and again just share my screen for a minute or so before letting you off again into the breakouts. So what we're going to do now is focusing on each of your projects rather than what we've done now is getting an overview of all the projects together. So we'll focus on how each of your projects can contribute to all 3 dimensions, not just one of the dimensions. So if you see here in the top of the Jamboard, you'll see a little arrow where it says next frame. And then we have multiple of these canvases here, which all look the same. And if you click here on the top with those icons, you'll see all those canvases next to each other. So the idea is that you will each choose one of those canvases, and you can first click on the middle here. If you double click it, you can enter your project name and location, just replace that text. And then other people will know that you've claimed that canvas. So that's going to be the canvas of your project. So if the invitation is for you to find one of those canvas templates that's not already taken by somebody else, and then spend 5 minutes in silence, just reflecting on how could your project contribute to widening and deepening, and maybe also lengthening. Could be just one thing for each of those dimensions. Maybe there's more than one that comes up. So even though your project might have a key emphasis on widening, and as someone said, maybe that's just in the current phase, maybe in the initiating phase, it's mainly about widening, but then in the lifetime of your project, you might want to also focus on deepening and lengthening at later points. So it's good to already have those in view at the beginning. So after each of you spending 5 minutes reflecting on your own project and how your own project contributes to all 3 dimensions, we invite you to share with your buddy in the breakout and discuss what you've come up with. And just sharing, having some more time to share about your projects using this 3D lens. And then we'll come back to the main room and hear a little bit what you've come up with or what was useful for you in those reflections. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed having a bit more chat time, getting to know each other's projects. And I'm really curious to hear how was that for you, and in which way did you find it useful to think about your project in these 3 dimensions and how it could contribute potentially to all 3 of them? Did it make you think about your project in a way that you haven't before? Did any key insights arise for you? So I'm really keen to hear some of those reflections. Again, please just raise your digital hand if you want to speak, and we'll take you one by one. Try to keep it brief so people get a chance to speak. Lily, do you want to take us away?
I was just going to say, I found it so useful to just have that time and really zone in. But we didn't do any talking, did we, Loretta? We were just on our own zone, and then suddenly we're like, oh, we've got to get back. So we didn't do any more chatting, but I did find it very useful in terms of my own project.
Was there anything in particular that came up for you that you didn't consider before, perhaps?
I think I'd kind of understood about how the project was about widening, but it was great to step into, and that did actually come from the chat in the last session about what was it that we wanted afterwards. So with our course, the Active Hope course, really this idea that each person that's on the course will hopefully want to then lead their own courses leading on, that you're kind of empowering. It's a beginning of many more to come. And for me, I think the deepening one is the one that I find the hardest. Like, I really understand how it can change mindsets and values, but I can't see how it makes the leap then to systemic change. And I don't know if we need to know what that is, but it would be interesting to kind of work more like what might be the links that could take it into that field.
Yeah, I could certainly speak to that from a transition town point of view. So here in Tooting and Balham in southwest London, I was thinking of that systemic change. What have we done to change systems? It's quite a big statement, that, isn't it? You think, goodness me, that's like quite zoomed out level. And then I got to thinking in our community garden in a primary school. So this is a place, Ravenstone Primary School, where my kids went, where we started literally digging up the tarmac and planting trees with the head support, although there is an XR rebel tree planted on site without the flags. Anyway, and I got to thinking, wow, actually, parents seeing their kids coming home with muck under the fingernails because they planted seeds that day. Year 6 kids planting seeds and then harvesting and eating together in July where they hardly ever eat vegetables when they go to school dinners, you know, and teachers telling us that they're scoffing down everything they've grown together, you know. So it's also for me a little bit about changing mindsets and values and that kind of thing. And I found that much easier to latch onto as an idea of that, you know, changing mindsets. It doesn't have to be the whole system, but how are you influencing mindset change for more people? And in a primary school setting, this is a collection of families who aren't transition people. They aren't XR people. They're just a variety of people, you know, going about their daily lives. So that really helped me. And I can see a thumbs up from Tim there. That idea of mindset or value change was much better at the scale I was projects are working on. Back to Tim.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, sharing, Rich. Sue, do you want to go next?
Okay. I think I realised too how much we almost take certainly our Lewis District Council for. Someone had written about, so we thought about the power and the power relationship in the deepening and how the influence, as you say. But we've been going as transition sort of quietly for, God, since the beginning, whenever that was. And the extraordinary thing, we felt totally ignored for so many years, you know, like it was really pushing a rock up a hill. And now it's out kind of mainstream, you know, it's absolutely there. The council are there, but some may be going, you know, we can't be complacent about this. But as you talked about the school, I'm now on a steering group with the Lewis District Food Partnership, and that is really systemic change. It's people who are now employed, and this is the big thing. This is the difference for the grant for me. We've been relying on people voluntarily, you know, getting older and tireder and less energy, or, you know, they can't afford to do it because they're working so hard. The real change to be able to be funding people to be doing the work that Transition has really initiated and has gone here, I feel, into the mainstream. But that we have funded people doing this, and it makes it really happen. So I think that is a fantastic shift. Thank you.
It's great to hear, Sue. Really, really exciting stuff. Hannah, do you want to go next?
Hi. I just really want to say I think that was super useful, and I know that everyone's in different stages of their kind of planning process, but for myself and John, I suppose this is early in the project, so before we've kind of got any further, and actually it's quite a useful planning tool in figuring out what kind of is going to go where and what's going to be helpful. And I found when putting the post-its on that a lot of things were kind of linking round in a circle. So there was something for widening, and then I thought, oh well, then if I kind of elaborate on that, I can put that into deepening, and then if I elaborate again, actually that helps with the longevity, which hopefully is what it's all about. So thank you so much.
That's great. Yeah, especially as the 3D model, kind of as the seed of the 3D idea infiltrates your mind and the roots start spreading, all this kind of complex interactions across the dimensions become more clear. So that's really great that you spoke to that, because they're so interrelated, of course, right? Mike, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'm still trying to catch up because I'm standing in for a colleague, so all of this is a bit new to me. We have a relatively small project that involved developing a repair cafe. But one thing that occurred to me thinking this evening that was interesting from that was that we had a spin-off to a group of people who are quite active in the community, but not generally in relation to sustainability, namely local sports clubs. So from our repair cafe, we started getting a local cycle club involved to do bicycle repairs initially. But since then, we've started talking systematically to all the sports clubs in the community, and we're getting a really good response from most of them, not all of them, sadly, but most of them see that they've got to green their own activities, but also they see that there's potential for community engagement. and just getting to know each other across the community and talking about a range of things from their point of view, promoting physical activity, getting people healthy. But healthy people and a healthy environment are not too far apart. So there are connections there, which I think are proving to be quite productive, or hopefully will do.
That's great. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of widening happening there, right? So interacting with other kind of groups, the sports club, maybe like churches, or different kind of groupings that maybe are doing things that are related to sustainability, but maybe don't think about it in that way. And then once you start connecting, that can also create lengthening over time as these sort of relationships across groups start building. That also creates resilience in the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much. Is there any other hands anybody else would like to share? Otherwise, Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, there's Juliet in Lewis, another Lewisonian. What is the person from Lewis? How do you say that?
A Lewisian.
A Lewisian. I knew it would be cool. You're all
a Lewisian,
cool,
but I've only been here 17 years, so I'm a long way from being a Lewisian. I need to live for another 40 years before I'm even allowed to give myself that title. But just quickly, something that I and John were talking about, which is a very simple thing to do in terms of deepening, that systemic change, and it's an easy one to forget, is whatever event you do is always invite as many local councillors at every level, town, district, county. We're always finding that county are the trickiest ones because it's because of the political mix. Always invite them to things, and always invite them to share their thoughts on things, because that's when things start turning into local policy.
Thanks.
Yeah, good job.
Go ahead, Tim, go ahead.
Well, I think you wanted to invite another question, Rich, right?
Yeah, and just to underline that, it's kind of, I mean, a lot of us in this group and beyond transition wear multiple hats at different times, right? And when it's one of transition's USPs, I think, to create that space to open out. I mean, there's boundaries to it, right? I guess there's boundaries to certain parts of the political spectrum you might not want to invite into the room, but there's quite a broad church. And indeed in this room, that kind of, that way we work is very open. So yeah, it's really good to hear that, and hear that as a metric of deepening, and hearing over the 15, 16 years of transition, some of those relationships really, like Sue was sharing, becoming people on the council, and I know Marcus in Chepstow as well became a council officer, not from his transition work, but that was part of his story and part of what he's bringing into that role, for example. So yeah, really good to hear that. And I was just going to be, I guess we're up to 10 minutes now. I want to say a couple of things. I was just like, okay, so we've presented this tool and played around with it in a planning sense, right? How does your project sit, and what's the tool telling you in terms of how it could become a 3D project? Would that be valuable, asking questions like this? And we've heard in the chat about, hey, this is where I'm at now, but I could imagine a pathway that opens into different dimensions, right, over the time and life of the project. So it'd be really interesting, and I'd encourage you to keep snapshots of what your assessment is, if you like, of your project a couple of times through the project, because then you could see that evolution. And also when you come to the other side of the project, you could reflect on that evolution, on the journey it's taken, on maybe what was surprising. And that'll really start enriching learning, I reckon. So yeah, this idea of using Scale 3D over time has really sent my mind and my heart flying tonight, hearing that idea, how it could change over time. And in terms of back to seed funding administrator headspace, yeah, about halfway through the year, about June, I'll get in touch about an interim report. How's it going? And it'll be like asking you, tell us your story of the project so far, some pictures and, visual stuff. And how is this, in terms of widening, deepening and lengthening, light touch kind of exploration into those spaces, so we can start seeing how the projects are going and what kind of impact they're making. Is that okay? And then at the end of the project, so like January to March 2024, sounds a bit Star Trek, doesn't it? We'll ask for that final report. So that's when we'll be bringing everything together. But the interim reports are really great for us to catch stories, Chris McCartney to come and talk to you, or to amplify your stories, that kind of thing, as well as us seeing and checking. Maybe there's some support needed as well. Okay, so that's the purpose of them. I'm going to hand over to Tim for our closing now, and it's looking like we're not far off heading for 8:30. Hey, Tim. So over to you, Tim.
Great, thanks, Rich. So yeah, as we said in this session, we just wanted to give you a first getting to know each other moment with the 3D model, and we invite you to really take this now into your groups and dive a little deeper with your colleagues, or the people who are in your projects. And we've actually created a canvas, one-page canvas, that allows you to just zoom into a little bit more granularity, and to both look at it from a goal setting point of view of like, what are the goals you want to achieve, but also what are the activities that you're planning to reach those goals, and how might you already think a little bit about measurement, monitoring, like what kind of data could you be collecting already throughout the project, not just at the end of the project, to really know, have you achieved your goals, or have you been on track, or how could you evolve your goals over time. So I just put that in the chat. I've done
that already for you, mate.
All right, sorry, I did it again. Just wanted to briefly share my screen and give you a sense of how that looks like without going much in detail. So we'll have, you see here on this canvas, we have the 3 dimensions on the left side, deepening, widening, lengthening, and then looking at the goals of your project, the activities to reach those goals, and how you might be measuring that. And you also have the link here in that template to the reporting template, which is still a draft, but this is kind of what we'll be inviting you to reflect on as you're reporting on your projects halfway through and towards the end. And it can already help you think about the project from the beginning in terms of what you want to achieve in those 3 dimensions. So it just gives a little bit more detail to what we mean with each of those. And you'll also see in this template the link to the Jamboard in case you want to go back to it and see what you've already filled out there, and as well as the video that we were sharing in the beginning. So if you have the link to this canvas, you also have the links to all the other points here. And we'll be sharing all of that on Vive as well.
Tim, any last words?
Well, I would say have fun continuing those conversations with your groups on your projects. And yeah, I'm just really amazed and happy to hear that for most of you, it seemed like this framework is landing fairly well. Some people maybe, some of the language might still be a little bit abstract or hard to grasp right away. But that's okay. If you have any feedback on how to simplify the language or things that should be added that are missing in those questions that we have in that reporting template, this is something to co-evolve with you and your wisdom and your insights. So really keen to hear from you with any feedback. Yeah, it's lovely to spend this time with you. Looking forward to hear more, see your posts on Vive, and be of service with any feedback or needs that we can help with. Rich, any last words from your side?
Yeah, amazing. What a lovely evening. I just invite you all to come off mute and say goodbye the way they do where you are, which for me is see you next time.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Go well.
See you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.